Before we dive in, viewer discretion is advised. This content is for entertainment purposes.
This wasn't planned at all, and the next few seconds left the entire studio silent and painfully tense. What happens when Hollywood's most charming star faces one of television's sharpest tongues, and nothing goes according to plan? That's the moment everyone in the audience, and watching from home, could feel the air shift, thick with tension. Before the cameras even rolled, you could sense it. A clash was brewing. And today, on The View, Leonardo DiCaprio would confront something far bigger than a movie role. He would face an unexpected storm of criticism that no one saw coming. The studio lights were bright, almost blinding, as the familiar chatter of the morning show filled the room. The audience clapped politely as Whoopi, Joy, Sunny, and the rest of the panel smiled at the cameras, their energy lively, almost rehearsed. But Leonardo's entrance changed everything. He walked in with that effortless Hollywood aura, the quiet confidence, the smirk that could light up the screen. But there was a tension in his shoulders that wasn't captured by the glossy cameras. Joy Behar, sitting in her usual spot, noticed it immediately. Her eyes narrowed, not in anger but in curiosity, the kind that could pierce through even the most carefully curated celebrity persona. Well, Leo DiCaprio, she started, her voice tinged with that signature teasing sharpness. We're so glad you could make it. I hear you've been quite busy saving the planet. Or is it just your latest project you're promoting? There was a ripple of laughter from the audience, polite but knowing. Leonardo smiled, a hint of patience in his eyes. Thanks for having me, Joy. I'm always happy to talk about both, he said smoothly, his tone even, controlled. But inside, his mind was already racing, preparing, anticipating. He had done countless interviews, but there was something different about this morning's show. Something about the way Joy's gaze lingered made it clear. She wasn't just here to chit-chat. The first few questions were easy, the scripted kind that every guest expects. The audience clapped, the cameras cut to commercial-ready close-ups, and the tension seemed manageable. But then Joy leaned forward, her fingers tapping lightly on the table, and her tone shifted. Leo, let's talk about your environmental work for a moment. You've made billions off films that are, let's be honest, often about indulgence, excess. How do you reconcile that with your role as this eco-warrior? Or is this just a PR image now? A hush fell over the audience. Leonardo's smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second, enough for anyone paying attention to notice. He leaned back slightly, a subtle, almost imperceptible gesture that said, I'm thinking carefully. I understand that question, he replied, measured. But I've always tried to use my platform to make a positive impact. The work I do outside of the movies is very real. And I believe that even people in entertainment have a responsibility to use their voice. Joy's eyebrows arched. Even if your lifestyle doesn't exactly reflect it, she pressed, leaning in. Her tone was sharp now, almost playful, but there was a sting beneath the words. The audience gasped lightly, murmurs rising. This was no longer a casual conversation. This was a confrontation dressed in civility. Sunny Hostin jumped in, trying to smooth the edges. Joy, I think he's saying that he does a lot behind the scenes. Maybe the public doesn't see all the details. But Joy wasn't finished. Sunny, I hear you, but the optics matter, don't they? People see private jets, luxury yachts. It's hard not to notice a disconnect between what you preach and what you practice. Leonardo's jaw tightened. The smile returned, but it was thinner now, like a mask. I can't change the world overnight. I try to do as much as I can, and I believe in progress over perfection. I think that's a message that's worth sharing, even if it's uncomfortable for some. A subtle tension began to radiate across the table. Whoopi gave a small, almost inaudible sigh, leaning back, while the camera captured the faint shift in Leonardo's posture. It was the kind of moment that made live television electrifying. The conversation was polite, yet every word carried weight. Every glance, every micro-expression, screamed. This was not going to be a typical interview. Joy's gaze sharpened, and she leaned in even closer. But Leo, isn't there a point where progress isn't enough? When people start asking if the message is just words. The words hung in the air. The audience leaned forward, silent now, waiting. Leonardo exhaled, his eyes flicking across the panel, then back to Joy. I get that, he said, finally. And I can't speak for everyone, but I live by the principle that action is more important than image. If my actions inspire even a small change, then it's worth it. I wish more people would do the same, rather than just criticize. A beat of silence followed. Then, almost imperceptibly, Joy's lips curled into that sly half-smile. So, you're saying we should just ignore the private jets? The audience tittered nervously. The tension was palpable. The interplay between the Hollywood star and the fearless host was mesmerizing. Like watching two masterful chess players maneuver, each word a careful move, each pause a calculated risk. It was then that Leonardo's own fire sparked. His voice sharpened, but remained controlled. I'm not asking anyone to ignore anything. I'm asking people to look at the bigger picture, at the work, at the efforts being made, at the impact beyond the headlines. Joy leaned back, her hands clasped on the table, eyes twinkling with challenge. And if the headlines say one thing, but the work says another, which one do we believe? The audience gasped audibly, some leaning in, others frozen mid-breath. The cameras captured every nuance, the flicker of tension in Leonardo's eyes, the confident defiance in Joy's posture, the silent calculations of Whoopi and Sunny as they watched the verbal dance unfold. At that moment, it was clear, this wasn't just an interview. It was a showdown, and neither side was willing to retreat. The tension didn't break, it thickened, like smoke curling around the edges of the set. The audience, now fully aware that this wasn't going to be a casual celebrity appearance, sat forward, some gripping their armrests, some holding their phones in silent anticipation. Leonardo's calm exterior was starting to crack, just a fraction, just enough to make the viewers at home feel the undercurrent of stress flowing beneath the surface. Joy leaned forward again, resting her elbows on the desk, her fingers drumming lightly. Leo, she said, her voice deceptively soft, let's dig a little deeper. People love the idea of Hollywood stars being activists. But sometimes, it feels performative. Is it activism, or is it branding? The question hit like a lightning strike. The audience collectively inhaled. Leonardo's eyes narrowed slightly, a subtle shift that spoke volumes. He had been trained to navigate the red carpet questions, the talk shows that asked the easy stuff. But this? This was a gauntlet. I can see why you'd think that, he replied, voice even but firm. And I can't control how people perceive my intentions. I only control my actions. What I do matters to me, and I hope it matters to the causes I support. That's the bottom line. Joy's smirk widened, just a hint, like she knew she had pushed him out of his comfort zone. But doesn't it bother you that perception is often louder than reality? That a picture of you on a private jet overshadows all the work you claim to do? Leonardo's jaw tightened. He took a slow breath, the kind that suggested he was weighing his next words carefully. I can't live my life worrying about every headline, every photo, every opinion, he said. What matters is that I keep showing up for the work that matters. If people want to focus on the glamorous parts, that's on them. The audience murmured. Some nodded, some whispered to their neighbors. You could feel the energy shifting. What started as polite curiosity had become a moral debate, a public trial of conscience staged on live television. Sunny Hostin attempted to mediate, her voice gentle but firm. Joy, maybe we're going a bit hard here. Leo is clearly committed to his causes. We see it, even if the media sometimes doesn't. Joy shook her head slowly, her eyes fixed on Leonardo. Sunny, I'm not going easy because that's not what the people watching expect. They expect honesty. And sometimes honesty hurts. Leonardo, people look to you. They see luxury, they see movies, they see fame. They want to know, is this man walking the walk? The words landed heavily in the air. Leonardo shifted in his chair, his fingers drumming lightly against the desk, a mirrored rhythm of Joy's earlier tapping. He leaned slightly forward, meeting her gaze squarely. I don't believe perfection exists, he said, his tone gaining intensity. I believe in responsibility. I take responsibility for what I can control, and I try to make a positive impact wherever I can. That's real, whether people like it or not. Joy paused, the corner of her mouth curling ever so slightly as if calculating her next verbal strike. And yet, it's hard not to feel like actions are measured by optics, isn't it? When people pay attention to the glitz and the glamour, doesn't that make it harder for them to see the impact? Leonardo's eyes flicked briefly to the camera, then back to her. A flicker of frustration appeared, fleeting but unmistakable. I know it's hard, he admitted. But the work doesn't stop because it's inconvenient for the public. The work continues whether people notice or not. And that's what matters most to me. The audience tensed again. You could feel a collective holding of breath, like the set itself was leaning forward to catch every word. Joy's expression didn't change, but her voice softened just enough to suggest she was probing, not attacking. So, you're saying the mission is bigger than the image? Yes, Leonardo said firmly, leaning back slightly, regaining some of his composure. The mission is always bigger than the image. But the reprieve was short-lived. Joy's eyes narrowed, and she leaned in as if she had one final pin to throw. But Leo, she said, her tone cutting yet playful, do you ever worry that the mission gets lost in the spectacle? That people remember the yachts more than the advocacy? The room went silent for a heartbeat. Leonardo's hands clasped together on the desk, knuckles white, and for the first time, his smile didn't reach his eyes. He exhaled slowly. I think people remember what they see, yes, he admitted, but they also remember what moves them. And if even one person changes their behavior, their mindset, because of the work, then it's worth every criticism, every headline, every private jet photo. Joy tilted her head, the smallest hint of a smirk playing at her lips. The audience tittered, sensing the subtle power struggle. Whoopi, usually the steady anchor, leaned back in her chair, her eyes darting between the two, as if weighing how far this verbal duel could go without exploding. It was at that precise moment that the energy in the room shifted from tension to anticipation. Leonardo, clearly feeling the weight of the questions, took a breath and decided to push back, not aggressively, but with a quiet intensity that made the words land harder. I can only hope people see the whole picture, he said, his gaze unwavering. I can't perform for perception. I can only act, and I act with conviction. That's the line I won't cross, compromising my integrity for applause. Joy leaned back slowly, her fingers steepled together. The audience, now fully engaged, erupted in soft applause and murmurs of approval, caught between admiration and suspense. This wasn't a battle with winners and losers. It was a clash of ideologies, a collision of celebrity power and journalistic scrutiny, unfolding live, unscripted, and raw. And yet, even as the applause echoed, there was a crackling tension that suggested the storm wasn't over. The cameras captured every flicker of emotion, the slight narrowing of Leonardo's eyes, the subtle tilt of Joy's head, the faint tightening of shoulders across the panel. Every gesture, every pause, every word mattered now. What started as a casual morning interview had morphed into a moral confrontation. The audience felt it. The hosts felt it. And Leonardo, despite his carefully constructed calm, felt it most of all. This was no longer about a movie or a charity initiative. This was about accountability, perception, and the very fragile line between public image and private conviction. By the time the first commercial break approached, the air was thick, charged with anticipation. Whispers and murmurs passed through the audience, some nodding in agreement, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Social media notifications would later explode with clips and debates, but for now, the set itself was a storm cloud on the verge of bursting. And as the cameras cut to a break, Leonardo sat silently, the tiniest flicker of exasperation crossing his features, while Joy's knowing gaze lingered, as if she had scored the first meaningful points in a game that was far from over. When the cameras came back from break, the atmosphere in the studio had shifted. The polite veneer of morning show cordiality was gone. What remained was raw, electric, a room on edge. The audience leaned forward, whispering in anticipation, knowing that the conversation was about to take a sharper turn. Joy Behar, ever the provocateur, didn't waste a second. She leaned forward, her eyes locking with Leonardo's. Leo, let's get real for a moment. People love you. They adore your movies, your charm, your fame. But adoration doesn't mean immunity. There are those who see contradictions between your work advocating for climate change and your lifestyle. How do you respond to that? A faint ripple of murmurs passed through the audience. Leonardo's fingers tightened around the edge of the desk, his jaw flexing. He paused, measuring his words carefully, because he knew this was a turning point. I can only control my actions, he said evenly, but with a sharper edge. I've dedicated years of my life, my resources, my energy to causes that matter. I don't pretend to be perfect. The work is what counts, not the perception. Joy tilted her head, her voice calm but edged with steel. But perception shapes reality, Leo. People see luxury, excess, and they wonder if your advocacy is performative. Don't you feel the pressure to match image with intent? Leonardo's eyes narrowed just slightly, the first flash of irritation in the exchange. He leaned forward, hands clasped, voice steady but firm. I don't let perception dictate my actions. I've made mistakes. I've learned. But I focus on what I can change, what I can impact. I can't control how the world interprets every decision I make. Sunny Hostin attempted to mediate, sensing the rising tension. Joy, maybe the critique is valid, but Leo has been consistent. We can acknowledge the concerns without undermining the work he's done. Joy shook her head, leaning back slightly, a wry smile forming. Sonny, consistency is great, but impact matters. People want to see accountability. They want to see that celebrities don't just preach from a pedestal. They live the principles they advocate. The audience shifted in their seats, sensing the unspoken duel. Leonardo's posture stiffened. There was a quiet intensity in his eyes that drew the viewers in, demanding attention. He exhaled slowly before speaking, his voice calm but cutting. I don't claim to be perfect. I don't need applause for good deeds. I do what I do because it matters. If people notice, that's great. If not, the work continues. Joy leaned in again, the smallest glint of challenge in her eyes. And yet, Leo, it's hard to separate the work from the optics. The luxury, the fame, the glitz, it colors everything. How do you convince people that your intentions are pure? Leonardo's hands spread slightly on the desk, a gesture of openness, yet there was tension in his shoulders, a subtle indication that he felt the weight of scrutiny. I can't convince everyone, but I hope that actions speak louder than headlines. That's the only way progress happens, through tangible change, not perception. The room fell into a brief hush, broken only by the low hum of anticipation from the audience. Joy's smile softened, though the edge in her voice remained. So you're saying you're willing to endure criticism, as long as the work speaks for itself? Yes, Leonardo said firmly, leaning back slightly, regaining composure. The work is always bigger than the criticism, bigger than the fame, bigger than the optics. But Joy wasn't done. She leaned forward once more, intensity building. And what about accountability, Leo? People don't just want to hear that work matters. They want to see accountability when mistakes are made, when the image doesn't match the mission. Isn't that important? Leonardo's eyes hardened, though his voice remained calm. Accountability is crucial. I hold myself accountable. I admit errors. I learn from them. But the narrative that focuses on superficial aspects, rather than substantive change, is misleading. That's what I push back against. A soft gasp passed through the audience. The cameras panned across the set, capturing every subtle expression. The slight tightening of Leonardo's jaw, the unwavering stare from Joy, the quiet observation from Whoopi, who sat poised as though waiting to see if the tension would erupt further. Joy's voice lowered slightly, more conversational, yet still carrying that probing edge. Do you ever feel frustrated, Leo? That no matter how much you do, people fixate on the spectacle. Leonardo's response was measured, but you could hear the undercurrent of passion. Of course I feel frustrated. But frustration isn't the point. The point is impact. Change. Progress. That's what drives me. The spectacle is secondary. It's irrelevant compared to what we achieve. The audience leaned in, captivated by the intensity of the exchange. It wasn't just a conversation. It was a clash of ideals, a collision of worlds, Hollywood glamour versus journalistic scrutiny. Every word, every pause, every glance carried weight. Joy's smile returned, faint, almost teasing. I see. So the mission outweighs the optics. But what if the optics undo the mission? What if people lose faith because appearances suggest hypocrisy? Leonardo's gaze sharpened. Then I rely on consistency, on transparency, on action. I can't control perception completely, but I can control the integrity of my work. That's the only real measure of impact. The audience's murmurs swelled, a mixture of approval, surprise, and awe. No one expected such a philosophical, almost moral confrontation on a morning talk show. The set, once bright and cheerful, now carried a sense of weight, of significance. Joy leaned back, letting the words hang, as if acknowledging that Leonardo had made his point, but also signaling that the battle wasn't over. The camera lingered on his face, capturing the subtle tension, the flicker of determination, the restraint that suggested the storm had only begun. As the segment drew to its first unofficial pause, the audience erupted in scattered applause, not for a victory, but for the gravity of what had unfolded. Leonardo's calm had endured, but the confrontation had etched a visible line of intensity across his features. And Joy. Her sharp gaze promised this wasn't the end. It was merely the escalation of a confrontation that would linger long after the cameras cut. The cameras rolled back from a commercial break, and the air felt heavier, dense with anticipation, electric with unspoken tension. Leonardo's composure remained intact, but there was a quiet edge now, a subtle firmness that suggested he was prepared to defend himself more forcefully. The audience sensed it instantly. Murmurs rippled through the seats as if warning that the conversation would turn from probing to incendiary. Joy leaned forward, elbows on the desk, gaze sharp. Leo, I have to ask, do you ever feel that your celebrity shields you from criticism in ways that ordinary people wouldn't be spared? Does fame allow you to act one way and preach another? A hush fell over the audience. Leonardo's eyes flicked briefly to the camera, then back at Joy, steadying himself. His hands rested on the table, fingers lightly tapping in rhythm with the tension vibrating through the room. I won't deny that being in the public eye comes with advantages, he said, voice measured, calm but firm. But it also comes with scrutiny. Every action is examined. That's part of the responsibility. I try to use the platform to amplify change, not excuses. Joy's lips curved into a knowing smile, the tiniest flash of triumph in her expression. And yet, Leo, we're back to perception. People see excess, opulence, movies about indulgence. They wonder, how does that align with the mission you claim to champion? The audience shifted, leaning forward, hanging on each word. Leonardo's jaw flexed slightly, the only visible sign of irritation as he chose his words carefully. I understand how it looks. But the measure of work isn't in the optics, it's in the action. The advocacy, the contributions, the initiatives I support, those are tangible. That's what counts. Joy didn't relent. Her voice softened, but the edge was unmistakable. So what you're saying is that people should look past the surface. That the yacht, the jets, the glamour, they are distractions from the real work. Leonardo's gaze hardened, though his tone remained controlled. Yes, distractions. But that's inevitable. People are drawn to spectacle. I can't stop that. What I can do is make sure the substance is there, that the impact is real. And if I fail to meet my own standards, I own that. I don't hide from it. Sunny Hostin interjected, attempting to diffuse the intensity. Joy, I think we're seeing Leo's point. He's acknowledging the challenges, but emphasizing responsibility and accountability. Joy shook her head slowly, eyes fixed on Leonardo, unwavering. Sunny, I get it. But acknowledging isn't enough. People want to see integrity matched with lifestyle. Words alone won't convince them. Leonardo leaned forward, elbows braced on the desk now, his calm exterior replaced by a subtle intensity. I'm not here to convince everyone, he said, voice firm but controlled. I'm here to act. The work doesn't need a PR campaign. The results speak for themselves. That's the responsibility I carry, not the public perception of it. The room seemed to tighten around the exchange. Every subtle movement, Joy's fingers tapping lightly on the table, Leonardo's measured breath, the pain lists exchanging quick, silent glances, added to the electric tension. The audience's murmurs faded to near silence, captivated by the verbal duel unfolding live. Joy's eyes sparkled, a mix of curiosity and challenge. And what about accountability in the eyes of the public? When mistakes are made, when perceptions clash with intentions, how do you respond? Leonardo's hands flexed slightly, a faint indication of his rising frustration, but his voice remained steady. I respond by acknowledging errors, correcting them where possible, and moving forward. But I don't let public opinion dictate the integrity of my work. That's the line I draw. The audience reacted audibly, some leaning in, some whispering to their neighbors, captivated by the rare intensity of a morning show interview turned moral confrontation. Even the other hosts, Whoopi included, watched carefully, sensing that the conversation had moved beyond ordinary critique into something deeper, a test of principles under public scrutiny. Joy's voice lowered slightly, almost intimate, yet piercing. So you're saying that integrity matters more than optics. But what if optics destroy credibility? What if the public loses faith because appearances contradict intention? Leonardo's response was deliberate, unwavering. Then I rely on consistent action, transparency, and measurable impact. Integrity isn't a headline, it's a practice. And that's what I focus on. There was a pause, the kind of silence that amplified every heartbeat in the studio. The audience was completely absorbed, the weight of the conversation palpable. Joy's eyes didn't waver. Leonardo's remained fixed on hers, a battle of wills under the unforgiving studio lights. Then, almost imperceptibly, Joy leaned forward, voice lowering further, sharper now. Leo, do you ever feel that fame itself has trapped you? That the persona people adore can overshadow the man trying to make a difference? Leonardo's hands tightened into fists briefly, then relaxed. The audience noticed. His voice, calm yet edged with emotion, carried a subtle intensity that demanded attention. Fame comes with a responsibility I don't take lightly. It amplifies mistakes but also amplifies action. I use it as a tool, not a shield. I can't control perception, but I control the work. And the work is what matters most. A ripple of murmurs ran through the audience. Cameras panned across faces, some nodding in understanding, some wide-eyed in awe. The room held a collective breath, caught in the gravity of the exchange. Joy leaned back slightly, the tiniest flicker of a smile breaking her steely expression. The first rounds of this duel had been tested. The second round had intensified. But the air was thick now with anticipation, a storm waiting to break, because both participants understood the stakes. Perception, integrity, and public accountability were on the line, and neither side intended to back down. And as the segment continued, the tension seemed to hum in the air like a live wire. Each word, each pause, each glance charged with the electric potential of conflict yet to fully erupt. By the time the final segment began, the tension had reached a palpable fever pitch. The audience was silent, every eye fixed on the desk where Leonardo and Joy sat, a living study in restraint and intensity. The confrontation had escalated beyond simple questions and answers. It had become a battle of principle, a collision between celebrity influence and journalistic scrutiny. Joy leaned in once more, her voice calm but sharp. Leo, we've talked about perception, responsibility, integrity, but let's be honest. How much of your advocacy is impacted by public opinion? Are you shaping your message for the world, or for the headlines? Leonardo's jaw tightened. His fingers drummed lightly on the desk, a rhythm of contained frustration. Then he leaned forward, locking eyes with her, voice low, unwavering. I'm not shaping messages for headlines. I'm shaping change. Every decision, every initiative, every moment I dedicate to these causes is about impact, not applause, not recognition. If people notice, that's a bonus. But the work exists regardless of acknowledgement. The audience gasped softly, sensing the sincerity in his tone, the quiet intensity that radiated from every word. For a moment, it felt like the studio itself had held its breath. Joy's eyes twinkled, a mix of challenge and admiration. And if the criticism keeps coming, if people continue to question your actions despite the work. Leonardo's gaze never faltered. He leaned back slightly, exhaling in a controlled rhythm, the faintest flicker of weariness in his eyes. Then I continue. I focus on the impact. I hold myself accountable. I push forward. That's the only way to create real change. The audience erupted into applause, a mixture of appreciation and awe. Some whistled quietly, some clapped harder, caught in the gravity of a moment that transcended ordinary television. The energy in the room was electric, but not hostile. It was the energy of people witnessing authenticity, courage, and the rare transparency of someone under fire yet refusing to crumble. Joy leaned back, a subtle smile playing at the corner of her lips. Leo, I'll give you this, you speak with conviction. But the challenge remains, how do you ensure that the public sees the substance, not just the spectacle? Leonardo's response was calm, measured, but carried the weight of years of experience navigating fame and influence. By being consistent, by acting with integrity, and by letting the results speak for themselves. The work matters more than the perception. Always. That's the line I won't cross, compromising action for image. For a beat, the room was silent again. Then Whoopi nodded subtly, breaking the tension with a soft exhale, while Sunny added, that's a perspective worth hearing. Actions over perception. It's not easy, but it's honest. The audience murmured, some standing, some clapping, as the final moments of the segment played out. Leonardo's posture relaxed slightly, but there was still a fire burning behind his eyes, a determination that no amount of scrutiny could extinguish. Joy, ever the inquisitor, let the last words hang, her expression a mixture of challenge and respect. As the cameras began to pull back, the audience erupted in applause, some whistling, some shouting encouragement. Social media would later explode with clips of the exchange, gifs capturing Leonardo's calm defiance, Joy's probing intensity, and the momentary sparks that flew between them. Headlines would read DiCaprio clashes with Joy Behar and morning show tension hits new high. But the reality was more layered. It was a rare glimpse into authenticity, confrontation, and accountability on live television. Backstage, producers whispered in astonishment, some shaking their heads at the unexpected depth of the exchange. Fans and critics alike would debate the moment for days, dissecting every glance, every pause, every subtle shift in tone. For Leonardo, the interview had been exhausting but validating. He had faced scrutiny, challenged assumptions, and stood firm in his convictions. Joy's colleagues, too, would reflect on the confrontation. Her questions had been sharp, precise, and intentional, yet delivered with the intelligence and humor that defined her presence. She had pushed a Hollywood star to confront not just his image, but the weight of public perception and responsibility. And the result was a conversation that neither side would forget. The aftermath extended far beyond the studio walls. Clips of the exchange went viral, sparking debates across social media platforms. Fans praised Leonardo for his steadfastness and dedication to causes bigger than fame. Critics lauded Joy for her fearless questioning and refusal to let a celebrity skate by with rehearsed answers. Articles dissected the interplay between celebrity image, public expectation, and authentic activism. For a brief moment, it felt as though the nation's attention had been captured by a simple conversation. But in truth, it had been so much more. Leonardo's team issued statements emphasizing his continued commitment to environmental causes, while Joy's interviews following the segment revealed her satisfaction at challenging the status quo. And everywhere, the audience, both in the studio and at home, continued to talk, debate, and share clips, drawn to the intensity of the confrontation, the moral stakes, and the rare glimpse of honesty that had emerged in a space often dominated by surface-level chatter. As the dust settled, the viewers were left with more than just a morning show clip. They were left with a story about integrity, accountability, and courage, about a man who refused to let criticism derail his purpose, and a woman unafraid to demand answers. It was a moment of television history, cinematic in tension, raw in emotion, and unforgettable in its stakes. Now it's your turn. What do you think? Did Leonardo hold his ground? Did Joy push him too far? Or just enough? Share your opinion in the comments below. And make sure to subscribe to Talk Narrative for more explosive, dramatic, and unforgettable stories like this one. Don't forget to like this video if you felt the tension, the drama, and the intensity of the moment. It's moments like these that remind us why live television can be so riveting. The debate will linger. The headlines will fade. But the impact, the clash of ideals, the confrontation of perception versus reality, will echo far longer than anyone expected. And for the audience who witnessed it live, that tension, that raw emotion, will not be forgotten anytime soon.